The night was supposed to be a celebration. The family's long dining table was covered with silver plates, steaming food, and sparkling glasses. Laughter filled the air as relatives, cousins, and uncles found their seats. But when Sarah walked into the room, silence cut through the noise like a knife. Every eye turned to her, and her stepmother, Evelyn, raised a hand to stop her. "There's no chair for you," Evelyn said coldly, her lips barely moving but her words sharp enough to sting. Sarah froze. Her heart beat fast, but she tried to smile, hoping it was a mistake. Maybe someone forgot. She looked around the table. Every chair was filled, every spot taken, except the one at the far end. A small wooden stool, the kind the servants used, was placed against the wall. "That's where you belong," Evelyn added, pointing. A few cousins laughed under their breath. Sarah's father, sitting at the head of the table, did not speak. He avoided her eyes, busying himself with his glass of wine as if he didn't hear a thing. That silence cut deeper than Evelyn's insult. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to ask why her own father allowed this humiliation. But her voice caught in her chest. She sat on the stool, her back straight, her face burning with shame. The smell of roasted chicken and spiced rice filled the air, but she had no appetite. Her hands shook as she folded them on her lap, while the others lifted their forks and laughed as if nothing had happened. Inside her chest, anger and pain twisted together. She remembered when her mother was alive, how these dinners used to be warm, filled with love. Now the same house felt like a prison, and the table that once welcomed her now rejected her. Evelyn leaned close to a guest and whispered something. They both chuckled, throwing Sarah a glance that made her feel smaller than ever. Sarah's jaw tightened. She would not cry here, not in front of them. If they wanted to break her, they would fail. But still, her eyes burned. As the feast went on, Sarah stayed quiet, listening to stories and laughter she was not part of. Every word, every smile, felt like a reminder that she was unwanted. And yet, something deep inside her whispered, "Remember this. One day things will change. One day they will regret this night." She lifted her chin slightly, refusing to bow her head. Even in her silence, she promised herself, this would not be the end of her story. Sarah grew up in the same house that now felt like a battlefield. When her mother was alive, the walls echoed with laughter, stories, and love. Her mother was gentle but strong, the kind of woman who stood by Sarah no matter what. But everything changed 5 years ago when sickness took her away. On the day of her mother's funeral, Sarah's world broke into 2 pieces, the part where she was loved and the part she was now living in. Her father remarried Evelyn only a year later. Evelyn was beautiful, polished, and sharp-tongued. At first, Sarah tried to accept her, hoping she could bring comfort to her father. But Evelyn quickly made it clear, Sarah was nothing more than an inconvenience. She controlled the house with cold precision, and her children, Mark and Julia, Sarah's step-siblings, followed her lead. Mark, a year older, never missed a chance to mock Sarah. Julia, younger but cruel in her own way, copied her mother's every gesture. What hurt Sarah most was not Evelyn's cruelty, but her father's silence. He wasn't a bad man, at least not before. He had once carried Sarah on his shoulders, told her bedtime stories, and promised to always protect her. But now he avoided conflict, letting Evelyn run the house. Sarah often wondered if he even saw her anymore. It was easier for him to pretend everything was fine than to stand up for his daughter. That betrayal cut the deepest. Heel ilmagers roast in omnil vet vizazoe. Here shall nit vilailusniker omlop. Her ebnil omsu. Her noxid off in the cost. Moor nozeris. Stirstrop bil mefsnil vet elps at one, so it officer them less no what's all wood. Her thumbs are as fuzzes here sneery. Moor rear vetted ericas nil vet. Here what's lost fuss this wahat. The is while as a wish in their own verse the aims a wish. Slime envy. Snishir balestro. See it through. Sing it while my fnitted with nerven so we show shame nil vet. Ethan that sells at it ears so wish no wish the quahra. Her street for the fnail, but me ears did no wish. Fell nor an ears near to get life fish. Nor so much wine needs never so whereas. There's blush her net in the vet of the adloch that more nurse the wish me asked your vet that in yammers so whereas. Got be roach on so fiala. Nee, breath up as or ze what zori helps go nifluster here. Here balance new in fat so nepsish. He'll mef not earn it so wish did no not why he's the way there. Moss nerf did have nailer a wish. Schneer sir has stem salger. Nicker brohne. They auch. Swish. No, I had the herbecker as slooks. The air in the house grew heavy weeks after that feast. Sarah had kept her head down, staying out of sight, doing chores without complaint. But Evelyn was never satisfied. She found fault in everything Sarah did. The way she folded clothes, the way she swept the floor, even the way she breathed. Sarah had learned to stay silent. But one Saturday evening, silence wasn't enough. The family was preparing for a big party. Evelyn had invited important guests from her husband's business circle. The dining table was dressed in white silk, golden cutlery set out for everyone. Sarah had been ordered to clean the silver trays. She worked carefully, polishing each one until it shone. When she placed them on the table, Evelyn walked in, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. "What is this?" Evelyn snapped, holding up a tray. Sarah looked, it was spotless. She couldn't see a single stain. "Do you think this is clean? Are you blind or just lazy?" Sarah shook her head. "I cleaned it, I promise. It's—" Before she could finish, Evelyn's hand struck her across the face. The sound echoed through the room, loud and humiliating. Sarah stumbled back, her cheek burning, her eyes wide with shock. It wasn't the first time Evelyn had insulted her, but it was the first time she had hit her. At that moment, Sarah's father walked in. For a brief second, Sarah thought he would finally defend her. But he didn't. He looked at Evelyn, then at Sarah, and simply said, "Do better next time." Then he walked away. Those words cut Sarah deeper than the slap. Her father had chosen his wife over his daughter once again. Evelyn smirked, satisfied with his silence, and tossed the tray back onto the table. By evening, the house was full of laughter and music. Guests complimented Evelyn on her taste and her home. Mark and Julia entertained everyone with stories, while Sarah was ordered to stay in the kitchen, serving drinks and food. She moved like a shadow, ignored and unseen. What I should such bring all on the gish. Hurry, so through no. Guess the wish spets the way you on the dress. Sneal nurse than me. Her voice, der wolf, and that pal sit up scrum. The answer, no vet on the wish. Sarah on the wish. Her house name him finishes it like Ferris, master for the when it must roast during a show. Hurry off, Gelner a bit. Her and you wounded it. Master the safe for nice built series. Her street for. So I had the silver. He remembers her thumber. If you're vezul the wish. The last day it's ish. Those are nice schwand. He'll the auch grows nid a ish feller hall. Her house ning it out for us nettering it. Inglis auch the thinger it's. The ever not as ish. Stir over her voice the weave a hair her. The balson ringing its let's see if her. The more romps her nurse the rares. Beyond other deal. So I serve off and war for that show. He'll eat McSeary Eris than I wish. And I'll was a wee. And the shale him try but such as a wee lurks nil vet zally rish. Lips so much. And I her nick bush the salga. So her first. The varosh game up. No giblish news. Felt surf zimmer forgets him at such. Nathan zisho. Her odds nips a ham. Say goes and keeps nil vet her voice. Murming out the snitz salg now where should your Harris. If you're vegnish dead in the bang it must net. After that night, Sarah carried the weight of Evelyn's words everywhere. She no longer saw the house as her home. Every hallway, every corner, felt like it was closing in on her. Evelyn grew bolder, treating her less like a stepdaughter and more like a servant. Sarah was ordered to wake earlier, clean longer, and eat last. Whenever she made a mistake, the punishment was harsh. Mockery from Mark, whispers from Julia, and cold silence from her father. But something inside Sarah had changed. She stopped hoping her father would save her. She stopped waiting for Evelyn to soften. Instead, she began watching, listening, noticing details she had once ignored. Evelyn had enemies too. She wasn't as perfect as she wanted people to believe. Sometimes late at night, Sarah heard Evelyn on the phone, her voice sharp, worried. There were secrets in this house, and Sarah felt she was closer to them than anyone else. At school, the pressure grew worse. Mark had begun spreading rumors about her, calling her poor and unwanted. Julia followed along, whispering lies that made Sarah look weak. Some classmates laughed at her, others avoided her. Sarah carried her books tighter against her chest, hiding in corners during lunch. She felt completely alone, but in her silence, her anger built like fire beneath the surface. One afternoon, Evelyn called Sarah into the living room. The family sat together, her father on the couch, Mark smirking in the corner, Julia pretending to look innocent. Evelyn held a piece of paper in her hand. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Sarah shook her head. "It's your school report. Do you see these grades? Pathetic. How can we spend money on someone who brings shame to this family?" Sarah's heart dropped. Her grades weren't bad. They weren't perfect, but they were far from shameful. Evelyn had exaggerated them, twisting them into failure. Her father glanced at the paper and sighed, but said nothing. His silence was approval enough for Evelyn. "From now on," Evelyn said firmly, "you'll spend less time at school activities. No library, no friends. You'll come straight home and work here. Maybe then you'll understand discipline." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but Evelyn's glare cut her down. Mark laughed, clapping his hands like it was a performance. Julia whispered, "Servant," under her breath. That night, Sarah locked herself in her room and cried quietly into her pillow. It wasn't just about the report, it was about control. Evelyn wanted to strip her of everything that made her different, everything that gave her hope. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only grew. Evelyn staged more reasons to humiliate her. If Sarah dropped a plate, she was called careless. If she finished chores too quickly, she was accused of rushing. If she was quiet, she was labeled ungrateful. Every move Sarah made was twisted against her. The worst betrayal came from her father. One evening, Sarah overheard him talking to Evelyn. His voice was tired, but his words struck her harder than any slap. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's better if Sarah goes to a boarding school, somewhere far. It might solve the problem." Sarah felt her chest tighten as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. Her own father, the man who once promised to protect her, was planning to send her away, not for her good, but to make Evelyn's life easier. For the first time, Sarah truly understood. She was alone. No one in this house would stand for her. No one would protect her. The betrayal was complete. But in that breaking point, a new strength began to form. If she had no one else, she would have herself. And that was enough to fight back. The storm came on a night when the house was full of guests again. Evelyn loved to host, showing off her wealth, her furniture, her perfect family. Sarah was once again forced to serve, carrying trays of food and drinks while pretending not to hear the whispers or feel the stares. But tonight was different. Tonight, something would break. As Sarah moved around the room, she noticed Evelyn slip away, her phone pressed to her ear. Curiosity pulled Sarah closer. She stopped near the hallway, hidden in the shadows. Evelyn's voice was sharp and low. "No, he doesn't know about the money. I've taken care of it. He's too blind to see." She paused, then added, "Once Sarah is gone, everything will be mine. He won't have anyone else to remind him of his first wife." Sarah's chest tightened. Money, lies, betrayal. Evelyn wasn't just cruel. She was stealing from her father, from the family. And worse, she was planning to erase her mother's memory completely. Sarah stepped back, her hands shaking, the tray rattling. Evelyn turned, her eyes landing on Sarah. For a moment, the world froze. Then Evelyn's lips curled into a thin smile. "So, you've been listening." The room fell silent as Evelyn dragged Sarah back into the center. Guests stared, curious. Sarah's father frowned, setting down his glass. "What's going on?" he asked. "This girl," Evelyn said loudly, her voice filled with false anger, "was spying on me. She's been sneaking around, trying to destroy this family. She wants to turn you against me." Sarah's heart pounded. She had two choices: stay silent as always or speak the truth. And for the first time, she chose her voice. "She's lying," Sarah shouted, her voice trembling but strong. The room gasped. Sarah had never raised her voice before. "I heard her. She's stealing money from you. She said once I'm gone, everything will be hers." Evelyn's face turned pale for a second before she masked it with rage. "How dare you!" she screamed, stepping forward, her hand raised to strike again. But Sarah didn't flinch this time. She stood tall, her eyes burning with years of pain and anger. Her father stood slowly, confusion on his face. "Evelyn, is this true?" The room held its breath. Evelyn laughed nervously. "Of course not. She's jealous. She hates me. She'll say anything." But Sarah didn't back down. "Check the accounts," she said, her voice steady now. "Check the papers. She's been lying to you, and you knew deep down, but you chose not to see it. Just like you chose not to see me." The words struck like thunder. Her father's face shifted, guilt mixing with doubt. Guests whispered, some glancing at Evelyn with suspicion. Evelyn snapped, her mask slipping. "You ungrateful little brat. You were never part of this family." The truth was out now. Sarah's pain, her humiliation, her silence. All of it exploded into this one moment. She looked her father in the eye, tears brimming but her voice unbroken. "I may not matter to you, but I matter, and I will not let her erase me or my mother." The room felt heavy, the air thick with tension. Her father's hand shook as he picked up his glass, then set it down again. Evelyn's face twisted in fury, realizing she had lost control. And Sarah, for the first time, felt powerful. Not because someone defended her, but because she finally defended herself. This was the night everything changed. The house was never the same after that night. The truth Sarah spoke could not be taken back. Her father tried to ignore it at first, brushing it off as a misunderstanding. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. He began to look closer at the accounts, the bank statements, the little details Evelyn thought she had hidden. And soon the lies unraveled. Turned out Sarah had been right. Evelyn had been taking money quietly for months, shifting it into her own account. Her father's shock was deep, but Sarah did not feel sorry for him. For years, he had chosen silence over love, pride over his daughter. Now he had to face the cost of that choice. Evelyn raged when the truth came out. She screamed, she cursed, and she blamed Sarah for everything. "You ruined this family," she shouted. But Sarah stood calm. For the first time, she didn't shrink under Evelyn's voice. She had no reason to fear anymore. Evelyn's power came from secrets and silence, and Sarah had taken both away. The guests who had seen the confrontation spread the story quickly. Neighbors began whispering. The woman who once held her head high, admired by many, now faced shame. Sarah's father, cornered by evidence, had no choice but to confront his wife. Their marriage cracked under the weight of betrayal. Through it all, Sarah felt a strange mix of pain and strength. Pain because the man she called father had let her down so many times. Strength because she had finally stood on her own. The days that followed were hard. Evelyn packed her things, taking Mark and Julia with her. They left in anger, slamming doors and shouting promises never to return. The house grew quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Sarah's father tried to mend things. He sat with her one evening, his voice soft, almost broken. "I failed you," he admitted. "I let you suffer when I should have protected you." Sarah listened, but the wound inside her was deep. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily. Still, she looked him in the eye and said, "You can do better now. Not for me, for yourself." It was not acceptance, not yet, but it was a step. With Evelyn gone, Sarah began to breathe again. She spent more time at school, pouring herself into her studies. She found teachers who noticed her brilliance, classmates who respected her quiet determination. Slowly, she started to build a future for herself, not defined by her stepmother's cruelty or her father's silence, but by her own choices. She began visiting her mother's grave more often. Sitting by the stone, she spoke softly, telling her everything that had happened. For the first time in years, she felt close to her again. It gave her strength, reminding her that love, though buried, could never be erased. Sarah learned to smile again, not the forced smile she wore at the feast table, but a real one. She understood now that strength wasn't about loudness or anger. It was about standing firm, even when the world tried to push you down. In the end, Sarah didn't just survive, she grew. She turned her pain into power, her silence into a voice. She knew there would still be challenges, scars that would never fully heal. But she also knew one thing with certainty. She had taken back her life. And from that day on, no one would ever deny her a seat at the table again. Months later, the house looked different. The sharp voices, the constant fear, the endless humiliation, they were gone. For the first time in years, Sarah could walk through the halls without feeling like a stranger. She had taken back her space, her dignity, and most of all, her voice. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Sarah sat at the dining table alone. The same long table where she had once been denied a seat. The memory of that night came back, the laughter, the whispers, the stool against the wall. But this time it didn't sting. It only reminded her of how far she had come. She placed her books on the table, spreading them out with confidence. She was preparing for exams, working hard for the future she wanted. For once, the table belonged to her, not to Evelyn's rules or her father's silence. It was hers. Her father entered quietly and watched her for a moment. He didn't say much anymore, but his eyes carried something new, respect. He seemed to understand now that Sarah wasn't a child to be ignored. She was stronger than he ever realized. Sarah didn't need his words. She didn't need anyone's. She had found strength within herself. Before going to bed that night, she opened her diary and wrote a single line. I am no longer the girl they tried to break. I am the woman they will remember. She closed the book with a steady hand. The past would always be part of her story, but it would never define her again. She had turned her pain into power, her silence into strength. And though life would bring new battles, Sarah knew she would never face them the same way again. Because now, she wasn't just surviving. She was standing tall.